Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful you're here with me as I talk about The Black Dahlia by James Ellroy. It has been quite a while since I posted a book review. One of the reasons is this was such an unpleasant read that it took me ages to read this book, and then after I finished it, I started into a science book, and I got about halfway through that book, which is great. I will be talking about it eventually, when I got an opportunity to do a buddy read of a different book. So then I kind of set that book aside and started into the latest one that I'm doing the buddy read for, and I'm about halfway through that now. So yeah, I haven't done a review for a while. This one isn't going to be the most fun because this, like I said, was a very unpleasant read. Of course, I'll get into it, but the only real reason that I finished it was because it is a mystery book, and so, of course, when you're reading a mystery book, you really want to know what happens, you know, the whole whodunit thing, so I did read it to the end. Unfortunately, I did purchase this book new, but it is thanks to my Patreon supporters that I was able to go out and buy this book, so thank you so much for those who support what I do here and allow me to make a few bucks for the time that I put into these videos. It really means a ton to me. The whole reason I picked up this book was because I've never really read detective noir fiction before, and so I just kind of wanted to break from the typical fantasy or science that I tend to read a lot, and thought I would just dive into a genre that I haven't explored. In the past, I have really enjoyed mystery stories. When I was a kid, I just loved all the Hardy Boys books, the Sherlock Holmes books, all of that kind of detective stuff, so I thought it'd be fun to try a mystery noir book, but it didn't really work out so well for me. Before I touch very briefly on the plot, I will say that the first thing you see, obviously, is this cover, and when you get into the book, you realize just how cleaned up this image is, in that when you read the book, which is a story about a murder, the description of this body is absolutely horrific. The body has been literally cut to pieces. The face has been smashed in, sliced from ear to ear. A total mess. If they had depicted this individual on the cover of the book in the way it's described inside the book, it would never be allowed on store shelves. So it's definitely a very stylized and sanitized version of the events that are described within this story here. As for the plot itself, our single point of view character is a boxer who ends up getting on to the police department, and kind of a co-main character for much of the book is another character who is also a cop who is a boxer. Our point of view character's name is Bucky Bleichert, and not long after he joins on with the police department, he ends up getting wrapped up in this murder case. They find this severely mutilated body, and he quickly becomes very obsessed with getting to the bottom of who the murderer was, who did this to this particular lady here. And so him and his fellow police officer actually both get extremely emotionally wrapped up in this whole case, to the point where it takes over their lives, and both on and off the job they are really putting in effort to solve this case. Now, as the story goes on, obviously that's really all I'm going to tell you about the book, being a mystery novel. I don't want to spoil anything, but as we go through the story, they throw in a big twist, and then we go a little bit further, and then there's another big twist on the twist, and it gets so really absurd that unfortunately it just becomes increasingly unbelievable how it's all going down, to the point where by the end of it I was like, this is just outrageous. I can't believe I read through the whole book just to get to this point here. You know, it's nice with a mystery book if the author can kind of put clues down for the reader so that maybe they can try to sort through them in their own head and maybe reach a conclusion as to kind of who done it. But in this book, I think it would just be literally impossible for the reader to follow along and try to figure out what's happening, just because, like I said, the author decides to throw in these really outrageous twists upon twists and that sort of thing. And really, it's a book about terrible people doing terrible things, whether it's the actual murderer doing this horrible thing to this young lady, or the main characters themselves acting like really despicable humans, because unfortunately the characters in this book are so unlikable. Even our main point of view character, Bucky Bleichert, is just not a good human. The story starts out in 1947, and with our main characters, the people we're following, being police officers. We're talking about 1940s cops, and obviously here in 2024 we have learned just how horrible cops can be to people of color, poor people, pretty much everybody except wealthy folks. And as you can imagine, in the 1940s, it was even so much worse, back when they didn't have body cams or other ways to monitor the actions of the police. And so we see just an incredible amount of racism in this book. This book takes place in Los Angeles. The officers who are the lead characters in the book are working in kind of poorer neighborhoods, largely black-dominated neighborhoods, and the way they treat these poor black folks is horrendous, to the point where they literally set them up to shoot them and murder them. And when they do so, they become heroes amongst their fellow cops for killing black folks. So that's the sort of people we're dealing with as our main characters. And right from page 5, we are encountered with the N-word, which I will self-censor here. And it said, every Central Division patrolman was called into duty, then issued a World War I tin hat and an oversized billy club known as a N-word knocker. So the truncheons they carried were known as N-word knockers due to their primary purpose. At least our point of view character, Bucky, is not as horrible as his other colleagues, and because of that he actually earns the enmity of his fellow police officers because of how easy he is on the black folks that they deal with on patrol. So later on in the book it says, every rumor portrayed me as a coward and a fool. When my second month's fitness report ended with the line, quote, this officer's passive patrol behavior has earned him the enmity of every enforcement-minded policeman on his watch, I started thinking of handing out 5 spots to the winos and beatings to every blue suit who looked at me even slightly hinky. Basically, he's made enemies with his fellow police officers because he's not beating up enough of the low-income folks in the neighborhoods that they're patrolling. On just the next page, he has begun to describe the police department as the bureaucracy that owned me, showing his dissatisfaction with the police force. Another hint that we're in the 1940s comes from one of the doctors here who they call in to do an autopsy, and they describe the doctor's entrance into the room in this manner. A tall old man smoking a cigar came in, along with a nun carrying a stenopad. Russ Millard, Harry Sears, and Lee followed them, the homicide exec shaking his head. You and Blanchard keep turning up like bad pennies. Doc, can we smoke? The old man took a scalpel from his back pocket and wiped it on his trouser leg. Sure, won't bother the girl any. She's in dreamland for keeps. So yeah, the doctor walks in smoking a cigar and just pulls a scalpel out of his pocket. Thankfully, there were at least 1 or 2 moments of much needed levity. There's this guy that the cops are questioning who is described as being a skinny white man in his 50s, and he says, I got an alibi, just in case you think I did it, tighter than a crab's ass, and that is airtight. A few paragraphs later, the same guy says, my boss's name is Mike Masmanian. You call him. He'll alibi me up tighter than a popcorn fart, and that is airtight. Not sure how tight a popcorn fart is, but apparently it is airtight. So it wasn't all 100% horrible. It's about the best I can say about this novel. Now here's really the worst part of it all, though. So I kind of had it in the back of my hand that the Black Dahlia is a real thing that happened at some point. And so after I finished reading the book, there was this afterword where the author describes working on the book. And sure enough, this work of fiction is based on this historical event where this young lady was found mutilated in Los Angeles in the late 40s. And so I looked it up on Wikipedia, and that was a while back. So I'm pretty sure that the real life case was never solved. So I guess this book is sort of the author's artistic license where he's taken this event and he's giving it a conclusion. As outrageous and terrible as the conclusion was, that's what the author decided to do with this. Now, the thing that really put the final nail in the coffin for me with this book was James Ellroy describing himself. And there is at least one part of this story where there is a parent-child sexual relationship, which was one of the things that was so out there and unnecessary to me. But when I read the afterword by James Ellroy, he was talking about how he had this almost sexual attraction to his own mother. Who, if I remember correctly, died when he was relatively young, still a kid, I think. And so that was starting to kind of fill in the blanks for me. When I got to the end of the book and realized that it was based on a true story, all I could ask was, why did the author choose to fill in the blanks of the real history the way that he did? Why did he choose to complete the narrative with the events that he made up to fill in those blanks? It didn't make much sense to me until I read about the author talking about himself and his own weird Oedipal tendencies and the experiences he had in his life. In fact, I guess the Black Dahlia was a kind of defining event for him when he was younger, because the author himself grew up in Los Angeles during this time. And so it kind of had a big impact on him, which is why he chose to write the book. But here is how the author describes the book that he ended up writing and the reason he wrote it. He says, quote, "The reason why I wrote this novel, misogynistic fury codified." So those are the three words he chose as the reason why he wrote this novel, misogynistic fury codified. And this misogynistic fury comes through on every page of the book in the way that our male cop characters deal with the women in their lives, deal with the strangers they encounter, deal with people on and off the job. And I guess that's just kind of ultimately what it came down to. And so, yeah, don't like the author, don't like the book. Really, the only positive thing I can say about it is that the technical aspect of the writing was good. It was at least well written from a strictly technical point of view. Like I said, it had just a couple of moments of humor to lift the reader briefly out of the hatred and violence that is in every page of this book. And so that's why I don't give it a 1 out of 10. I give this a solid 2 out of 10. And that was my first experience with noir fiction. Maybe this genre just isn't for me. Maybe I'm at a point in my life where 1940s casual racism and misogyny is not the way I want to entertain myself. Or maybe you're aware of much better representations of the genre that I might enjoy and that I should look up. If so, please do get into the comments and let me know. And if not that, I would just love to know what you've been reading. Are there any books that you've been especially enjoying lately? Let's talk about happier things, shall we? I would love to hear from you. And just really appreciate you watching. Cheers. And very early on into our main character's the story starts out in 1947. Pretty much everybody, they have the choose to complete the story